Why did no one step in when they mocked her? Maybe because silence was safer. Maybe because no one wanted to stand beside the woman who didn't fit the picture they had built of what strength should look like. The California sun turned the grinder into a skillet, heat radiating off asphalt until it shimmered like liquid steel. Boat crews circled in restless loops, their nerves disguised as bravado, their laughter brittle and loud. At the center of that open space stood a single figure. She looked out of place. Oversized gray PT shorts, blank navy tee, nothing that screamed rank or reputation. Her hair pulled tight, her posture calm, almost detached. To them, she was just another observer, another staff face who would vanish as soon as the clipboard filled up. But the quiet ones, the ones who don't flinch when the noise starts, they always make people uneasy. A whistle shrieked. The line of candidates froze mid-step. Master Chief Navarro stood at the front, arms folded like a barricade, his grin more challenge than humor. "Commissary, that way, ma'am," he barked. "These aren't yoga mats. You might want to find your real clothes before you get hurt." The laughter that followed wasn't spontaneous. It was survival, a desperate chorus of young men showing allegiance to power. A laugh at someone else's expense always sounds louder when you're afraid it could be you next. But she didn't move, didn't blink, didn't give them anything. Feet planted, gaze steady, shoulders relaxed, the kind of calm that only unnerves people who mistake noise for dominance. From the catwalk above, Captain Rowan Hale leaned forward, squinting at her stance. He didn't know why she caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she blinked grit from her eyes, slow and deliberate, like a person used to sandstorms, not office air. He didn't say anything, just watched. When the laughter died out, she turned and walked toward Supply. Not fast, not angry, just quiet. And somehow that silence followed her like a shadow that refused to leave. The next morning began under the same relentless sun. White light burned every surface until even shadows looked sharp enough to cut. The grinder pulsed with motion again, candidates dragging rubber boats, instructors barking over the surf, the metallic scent of CLP and sweat mixing with salt air. Beyond the fence, gulls squabbled over scraps while jets screamed overhead from North Island. The rhythm of a place that worshipped endurance. Lieutenant Commander Mara Ellison moved through it like a ghost in daylight. No ribbons, no warfare pins, no visible past. Officially, she was there as an evaluator, an auditor for training safety and logistics flow. A bureaucratic role that meant keep your distance and take notes. Unofficially, she was there for something heavier. A run of preventable injuries had rattled command. They wanted a quiet set of eyes, someone who'd seen what happens when a small mistake becomes fatal. EOD, explosive ordnance disposal, had shaped her that way. Every step calculated, every decision weighed between detonation and survival. But none of that mattered to the candidates sweating under the sun. To them, she was just another staff officer in a gray shirt. No trident, no name, no story. Candidate Parker was the first to test her silence. He leaned on his oar, grinned sharp and loud enough for everyone to hear. "Tour guide's back," he said. "Maybe she'll tell us where the commissary's hiding." Snickers followed. They weren't laughing at the joke. They were laughing because they needed to belong. Mara didn't respond. She just looked at him, not angry, not amused, just measuring. Every environment has its pressure plates, she thought. Some built into the ground, others built into people. The loudest one always steps on their own first. Candidate Alvarez, quieter, uncertain, called out softly from behind the raft. "Ma'am, you need shade. It's brutal out here." The kindness cost him an elbow from Parker. But Mara inclined her head politely. "I'm fine, thank you." Navarro watched from across the deck, his expression unreadable. He'd seen generations of candidates break against that grinder. He wasn't cruel, not in his own mind. He believed he was guarding a sacred threshold, the last dam against mediocrity. But cruelty dressed as toughness grows roots fast. It gives cover for immaturity, until laughter becomes its own kind of weapon. He believed he was building resilience. He didn't realize he was feeding something else. Mara stood at the margin, notebook closed, eyes tracing details that no one else noticed: the angle of the sun, the split seam in the asphalt, the echo off the pool walls. Every corner catalogued, every risk mapped. Her fingers brushed against a coin in her pocket. She turned it once, twice, then stilled. Old habit, old memory. The scar on her left forearm tugged beneath the sleeve of her shirt as she shifted. She kept it covered. But the California light has a way of finding what people try to hide. A memory flickered half-moon over a desert road, the soft click of a pressure plate arming itself under packed dirt. The air changing, stillness before detonation. She blinked it away. Memories were landmines of their own. The heat thickened. The instructors cycled them through evolutions like clockwork, log PT, until arms trembled, flutter kicks until skin tore against salt-crusted asphalt. Navarro stalked toward her finally, boots drumming into the ground. "Ellison," he barked, "you're here to watch, fine, but remember, this grinder doesn't care about reports. Out here it's pain or progress. Don't confuse the two." Her gaze didn't waver. "I understand, Master Chief," she said evenly. "I'm here for one reason." He raised a brow. "And what's that?" "Fewer folded flags." The words hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water. For a second, even the gulls fell silent. Then Parker chuckled again, breaking the tension. "Guess that's one way to say you're just taking notes." The laughter returned, but softer, uneasy. By mid-morning she'd mapped the schedule: grinder PT, log carries, pool competency checks. Observation only, no interference, no comment. But observation is never passive when you know what to look for. The heat bled through her shoes. The air tasted like metal and salt. Every face, every movement, every careless slip, she logged without needing a pen. When the day ended, she walked back toward her quarters, her steps even. The wind carried salt and jet fuel. The horizon flickered with afterburner trails. The first incident happened the next morning. The sun wasn't even fully up. A faint orange glow lit the row of lockers in the visitor quarters. She unlocked hers and froze. Empty. Her uniform, her notebook, her kit, gone. In their place, taped neatly to the inside of the door, was a sheet of lined paper. Scrawled across it, jagged handwriting. "Observer, observe this." She stood there for a long time, the silence thick. She didn't tear the note down in anger, didn't storm to command. She read it once, folded it carefully, and slid it into her pocket, the same pocket where the coin rested. Then she pulled on a spare set of PT gear from the bottom of her duffel, laced her boots tight, and walked back out into the sun. What would you have done if your uniform, your identity, was stripped away in a place where respect was currency? Would you have fought back, demanded justice, or walked out like nothing had been taken from you at all? By the time she stepped onto the grinder again, the crews were already sweating through another evolution. Log PT, surf runs, flutter kicks. The air shimmered with heat and noise. Candidate Parker spotted her first: no uniform, no notebook, and couldn't resist. As the crews rotated, he rose to his feet, brushing sand from his legs. When he walked past her, he kicked deliberately, sending grit across her shins. "Oops," he said, smirking. The laughter this time sounded different. It was thinner, sharper. Some candidates looked away. A few didn't laugh at all. Mara brushed the sand away with one motion, calm, measured. And then she just looked back at the grinder, as if the insult hadn't even registered. Would you have snapped back, or would you have let the silence answer for you? Navarro's voice cut through the air. "Ellison, if you're gonna observe, do it up close. Let's see if you've got the stomach to watch this where it hurts." Boat crew 4 faltered under their log. Parker cursed. The weight tipped. He looked up at her. "Corner's open, ma'am," he sneered. "Wanna carry some real weight?" Mara didn't flinch. "Not my place, candidate." He grinned. "Yeah, thought so." His crew laughed again weakly, but the log shifted and nearly dropped. Navarro roared for rhythm. "Pick it up." Mara watched without reaction, her gaze moving between shoulders, footing, timing. Every detail went into memory. Would you have grabbed the log just to prove them wrong? Or would you have remembered that strength isn't proving anything to those who need an audience? By the time the crews hit the pool deck, the whispers had spread. She wasn't really an operator, not a SEAL, not combat tested, some Pentagon fix here to shuffle paperwork. "PowerPoint queen," someone muttered. Myra heard it. She didn't respond. She noticed instead a loose strap on a diver's harness, stepped over, adjusted it without a word, moved on. That's the thing about competence. It rarely announces itself. By late afternoon, Navarro finally voiced what everyone else had been thinking. "Lieutenant Commander Ellison," he called out, voice cutting through the wind. "What exactly do you think you're learning here, standing there while men work?" The candidates leaned forward, hungry for a show. Mara met his eyes, her voice calm. "I'm here to lessen the number of folded flags, Master Chief." Silence. Real silence. Even the surf seemed to hold its breath. For the first time, the laughter didn't follow. A few heads lowered, Parker shifted. Someone exhaled, slow, uncertain. And something small, almost invisible, began to change. The next time she walked past the crews, no one spoke. Not yet respect, but not ridicule either. Something in between. By dusk, the heat had faded, but the tension hadn't. The grinder felt different, quieter, tighter, as if everyone sensed that something had started, though no one could name it yet. Mara sat alone near the equipment cage, watching the last of the sunlight fade over the bay. The coin in her pocket caught a glint of orange light. She turned it once, then let it rest. Change doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, one moment of dignity at a time. Why did Captain Hale keep watching her? He told himself it was protocol, but deep down it was something else. The way she moved, too precise, too measured, like someone who'd lived with consequences. By midweek, the heat turned mean. The California sun didn't just beat down. It reached up from the asphalt and wrapped around the candidate's legs like a living thing, making each breath taste of metal and salt. From the catwalk above, Captain Hale tracked the rhythm of the crews, the grunts, the barked cadence, the dull thud of boots striking the grinder in unison. He could hear discipline when it was real, and he could hear when it was only noise pretending to be order. Somewhere below, something was off. He didn't know what yet, only that her presence had changed the sound of the place. Mara Ellison stood on the periphery like she always did, neither in nor out. The wind pulled at the edges of her shirt, brushing grit across her arms. She wasn't immovable, just deliberate, always aligning her view, angle to the light, distance to the crew, the arc of a swinging oar. Every movement carried the precision of someone trained to map chaos before it happened. Hale leaned against the railing, studying her. Most observers fidgeted. She didn't. Her stillness had gravity. It bent noise around it. When the whistle shrieked for rotation, the crews broke formation, staggering toward the shade line. Sweat poured, boots dragged. Mara stepped back to let them pass, hand brushing the pocket where she kept that coin. The light caught it just right, a flash brief but sharp. Hale's eyes narrowed. Most challenge coins were polished to bragging brightness. This one was. It was dark around the rim, edges worn to near ghost. He could just make out the faint curve of an anchor, half swallowed by abrasion, and a Latin fragment, just a slice. Pace. Something about it tugged at him. He'd seen that before, not in bars or framed displays, but on a memorial table beside a folded flag. He told himself he was imagining it, that coins repeated, units copied each other. Still, the thought stayed. Down on the grinder, laughter broke out again, but not the same kind. It came in short bursts, forced, uneven. It died when she passed. Mockery didn't pay dividends anymore. During a short water break, Mara sat on the edge of a rail rack, unrolling a strip of beige tape from her sleeve. Kinesiology tape. Her left forearm bore a pale scar beneath, thin but deep, a mark that ran like a quiet river under sunburnt skin. She didn't hide it from herself, only from questions. She laid the tape in staggered strips, anchoring it with the heel of her thumb, pressing each line with the care of someone who had learned the difference between sticking and securing. Hale watched from above, recognizing the pattern. Not vanity, not cosmetics. That was load management, blast damage recovery, the kind of support people used when tendons failed at the exact moment you needed them most. A candidate wandered near her, nervous but curious. "You, hurt something, ma'am." "Old thing," she said, voice soft, almost dismissive. "Even tape needs reminding who's in charge sometimes." He smiled awkwardly and walked off, pretending to understand. But his gait changed slightly, straighter, more aware. Respect spreads like that, quietly. The sun climbed, hammering light against the pool's surface until it shimmered like shattered glass. Chlorine mixed with sea salt. Aluminum rails burned to the touch. Instructors prepped rebreathers along the edge. Rubber hissed, buckles clicked. Somewhere between those sounds, another noise slipped in, faint, almost hidden. A slow hiss, like sand leaking from a fist. Most people would never have noticed, but Mara flinched, not fear, recognition. Her head tilted a fraction, eyes narrowing toward the source. A valve. The kind of leak that could turn a routine dive into an oxygen toxicity case before anyone realized. She didn't call out, didn't embarrass anyone. She let the safety diver find it himself. 2 heartbeats later, he did. The O-ring hadn't seated right, he fixed it. The hiss died. No drama, no attention, just precision. Hale saw it, filed it away. Recognizing a gas mix issue by sound alone wasn't something learned in a briefing. From the bleachers, the whispers carried, policy fix, PowerPoint queen, the kind of cruelty that thrives in groups. Mara walked past them, adjusting a strap on a tank left slightly loose, tightened it, said nothing. Hale exhaled slowly, the weight of realization growing heavier. Later, under the brutal noon glare, they moved to the obstacle course. The O-course had its own smell, pine resin baked into old wood, the ghost of generations who had sweated and bled there. The high rails shimmered. Heat made the air look alive. Boots thudded, ropes creaked. The candidates strained, muscles trembling under sunburned skin. Hale's eyes followed Mara again. She wasn't looking at faces. She was watching hands, watching where palms slipped, where fingers tightened, where confidence faltered. A candidate climbed too fast, one hand slick with sweat. He reached, missed, caught again just in time. Mara let out a tiny breath, the kind that sounded almost like a laugh. Relief hidden quickly. She didn't interfere, just observed. But her eyes carried that same weight, the kind that makes others move better, even if they don't know why. As the afternoon dragged on, a white patrol car pulled up near the chain-link fence. Dust trailed behind it. An Iraqi liaison officer stepped out, a translator in tow. His uniform was immaculate, but his eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who'd spent years asking for help from systems that always said, "Not enough resources." He spotted Mara first. She adjusted her pace to his without being told, hands visible, chin lowered slightly, a gesture of respect. Then softly she spoke in Arabic, not textbook phrases but personal ones, asking about his mother's medicine, his baby's sleep in the heat. The officer blinked, surprise flickering into a smile. It was a small thing, 2 sentences, 4 at most, but it rippled through the air like a code no one else could decipher. The translator realized he wasn't needed and stepped back, watching silently. The candidates nearby stared, puzzled. They didn't understand the words, but they recognized tone. It wasn't performance, it was care. Coins are coins, scars are scars. A flinch is just a flinch. A phrase is only a phrase, but when enough of them align, a pattern starts to form. On the catwalk, Hale leaned on the railing, replaying the coin in his mind. The anchor, the Latin word pace. Peace or maybe speed, or maybe both. He tried to shake it. He told himself he was seeing ghosts, but deep down he already knew recognition is fragile. It breaks if you speak it too early. As the afternoon burned into white, the base went briefly quiet, the way machines do when everyone's tired but afraid to admit it. The grinder had changed. The laughter was gone. The rhythm was different now, shorter, sharper, laced with a new kind of alertness. Hale stayed on the catwalk after the crews rotated out, listening to the silence. It wasn't empty. It was charged. He remembered another silence years ago, a desert road lit by muzzle flash, a vehicle straddling a buried IED, an EOD officer crawling beneath it with nothing but a ceramic blade and steady breath. He'd read the report. The name had been redacted. He told himself it couldn't be her. Still, when the wind shifted, he thought he heard the faint metallic rattle of a coin turning between fingers. That night Coronado slept uneasy. The next morning brought the pool again, the remedial session, the one everyone dreaded. The air smelled of chlorine and salt. The water surface mirrored the sun so bright it hurt to look. Alvarez stood at the edge, mask trembling in his hands. His jaw was tight, his chest rising fast. He failed the knot-tying evolution the day before. Panic had a way of clinging to memory. Navarro loomed over him, arms crossed. "You know what happens if you fail again, candidate?" "Yes, Master Chief," his voice cracked. "Then don't." Alvarez took a breath and pushed off. Bubbles trailed upward, his rope twisting. For a moment it looked fine, rhythm, order, control, and then the thrashing began. The panic, the desperate claw for air. The nearest safety diver was already entangled with another candidate. Hale felt the silence before it broke, that split second where hesitation kills. Mara didn't hesitate. She stripped her PT shirt in one motion, tied her hair and dove. No splash, just clean entry, practiced precision. She hit the water like memory. Below, Alvarez's movements were chaotic, one hand trapped in rope, mask flooding. Mara reached him, rotated his body, secured his airway with her forearm and legs in a single motion that spoke of repetition, not guesswork. At the surface, she delivered 2 crisp rescue breaths, calm, efficient. "Get the board," she called. Her voice didn't shake. They pulled Alvarez to the edge. She knelt beside him, checked his pulse, then examined the mask. A hairline tear near the skirt. She held it up. "This one leaks," she said quietly, pressing a replacement into his hand. "Bad seal means CO2 buildup. More CO2 means panic. That's what hit you." Alvarez nodded, trembling. "Yes, ma'am." The silence that followed was heavy, too heavy to break. Even Navarro said nothing. Hale watched from above, the pieces falling into place. When the instructor rolled over the next rebreather unit, a faint hiss came again. Mara's head turned. "Check your O-ring," she said softly. The instructor frowned, adjusted. The hiss stopped. Not luck, not coincidence, pattern. On the bleachers, Parker leaned toward Alvarez, whispering, "That wasn't luck." Alvarez nodded. "No, it was." No applause followed. No speech. Just the sound of the pool filter humming beneath the weight of realization. Mara slipped her shirt back on, brushed water from her shoulders, and stood at the edge, silent again. But everyone saw her differently now. The air had changed. The grinder would sound different tomorrow. She had come here to observe. They thought they had stripped her identity. Instead, they had stripped away their illusions. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's pressure, waiting for the right moment to speak, without words. How much could one coin reveal? Captain Hale told himself it was nothing, just another unit memento, but the thought refused to fade. The next morning, Coronado woke under a sky the color of burnished steel. The air carried that heavy, electric stillness that comes before a storm. Gulls hung low over the bay, their cries sharper, more impatient. Hale stood on the catwalk again, coffee cooling in his hand, eyes fixed on the grinder below. The candidates dragged IBS rafts across the asphalt, their voices hoarse, laughter nearly gone. Only the thud of effort remained. But it wasn't them he was watching. It was her. Lieutenant Commander Mara Ellison moved among them like someone who belonged and yet didn't. Her pace slow but not hesitant. Her eyes taking in everything, boot angles, posture, muscle fatigue, the kind of details no auditor cared about. Hale had seen observers before. He'd read their reports, dry paragraphs of risk metrics and procedural jargon, but no one who wrote those papers moved like that. He took a slow breath, tracing the thought that had been gnawing at him since yesterday. The coin, the tape on her forearm, the way she'd heard the hiss no one else did. None of it belonged to a desk officer. Below, Navarro barked orders, his voice echoing across the grinder. Parker stumbled under the log, cursing, and Alvarez reached to steady him. For a second, they locked eyes with Mara, the kind of look that carried more weight than any salute. Respect, newly born and fragile. Hale set his mug down, unable to shake the unease. He walked down from the catwalk, boots echoing on the metal stairs. The sun hit his face, sharp and hot, but he didn't notice. He crossed the grinder, watching Mara as she adjusted the strap on a candidate's shoulder harness. Small correction, no attention, just instinct. He stopped a few feet away. "Lieutenant Commander," he said quietly. She turned, shading her eyes. "Captain." "Walk with me." They moved along the fence line, away from the noise of the cruise. The bay wind picked up, carrying the tang of fuel and salt. Hale glanced at her hand, the one that brushed her pocket every so often. He nodded toward it. "Coin from your last command." Her expression barely changed, something like that. He waited, giving her space to elaborate. She didn't. "I've seen a few like it," he said. "Blackened edges, anchor half worn, not standard issue." She looked out over the water. "No, it's not." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Finally, Hale spoke again, voice lower. "5 coins like that were minted after a joint op in Alchem, EOD and Special Warfare Task Unit. Only 5. The wind tugged at her hair. For a heartbeat, her hand stilled over her pocket. He continued softly. "I saw one of them once, at a memorial table." Mara's eyes didn't waver, but something in her posture changed, a small shift, barely visible. "Then you know why I don't talk about it." He nodded slowly, root scion. Her breath caught, so faint he almost missed it. "The convoy that got pinned," he said. "Pressure plate under an MRAP, redundant firing chain. Someone crawled under and cut it with a ceramic blade." She didn't answer. "They said the lieutenant was steady under fire, didn't even look up when rounds hit the hood, just kept cutting." Her gaze drifted to the horizon. The sky was darkening now, storm clouds inching closer from the west. "That report never named the officer," Hale continued. "But I remember the line, task unit owes survival to unidentified EOD lead, gender unlisted. I remember because I thought it was an oversight." Her lips curved, but it wasn't a smile, more like a memory resurfacing. "It wasn't an oversight," she said quietly. "It was protection for everyone." Hale's voice softened. "You walked away from that." "Walked is generous," she said, flexing her taped arm slightly. "Some parts didn't." He nodded, understanding more than she expected him to. "Why come here, then? Why subject yourself to this circus?" "Because this is where mistakes start," she said simply. "Before they reach the field, before they turn into folded flags." The simplicity of it silenced him. They walked a few more paces before she spoke again, quieter now. "It's strange," she said. "You save a convoy, cut one wire right, and the story ends there. People think that's the victory, but it's not. The victory is when the next generation doesn't have to crawl under that same truck." Hale studied her profile, the scar at her temple half hidden by hair, the steady line of her jaw. "Does anyone else here know who you are?" She shook her head. "They don't need to." The thunder rolled low in the distance, faint but approaching. "Captain," she said after a moment, her tone level, "if you're going to tell them, wait until they've learned why respect matters first. Not because of what someone did, but because of how they carry themselves after." Hale stopped walking. The weight of her words landed harder than any command. He looked back toward the grinder, the candidates moving under Navarro's watch, the logs shifting, the rhythm holding. "You've already started teaching them that," he said. She didn't reply, just turned the coin in her fingers once, twice, then slipped it back into her pocket. They stood there a long moment, the storm wind rising. By late afternoon, the clouds had rolled in fully. The sky had gone from burnished gold to slate gray. Thunder muttered over the water. The candidates gathered for the last evolution of the day, a safety drill, routine on paper but grueling in practice. Navarro paced like a wolf, barking commands, daring anyone to falter. Hale watched from the edge of the grinder, arms folded, his thoughts still tangled around what he'd learned. Mara stood opposite him, helmet under one arm, expression unreadable. When Navarro called for volunteers for the equipment demo, no one moved. He scanned the line, smirked. "What's wrong? Don't all raise your hands at once." Parker glanced at Mara, then quickly looked away. Navarro caught it. "Fine, we'll pick. Ellison, since you're here to observe, maybe you'd like to show the class what observation looks like in full kit." Hale's instinct kicked in to intervene, but Mara nodded before he could speak. "All right." Her voice was calm. The candidates exchanged uneasy glances. Navarro gestured toward the rack, plate carrier, helmet, rifle, headset. "Let's see if paperwork can hold weight." She stepped forward. The air had gone still. Even the wind seemed to wait. She strapped on the plate carrier, adjusting the shoulder pads with practiced efficiency. No fumbling, no wasted motion, the kind of fluency that only comes from repetition under stress. She cinched the chest strap, checked the buckle, then donned the helmet. The rifle came next, safe, muzzle down. She slung it across her shoulder, the sling already taped near the ladder points. The instructors went silent. She tapped the tape. "This," she said, voice carrying clearly, "keeps the sling from catching on rails or rungs. Seen too many wrists torn open because someone thought tape was optional." She moved methodically, explaining each small adjustment, the kind of details no classroom taught. Her tone wasn't prideful, it was factual, measured. "Safety isn't weakness," she said. "It's precision. Precision saves lives." The candidates watched her now, with a kind of stillness Hale hadn't seen all week. Navarro's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. She demonstrated again, this time the proper way to tape chem lights before a night surf. Loose ones rip away in the breakers. You lose your visual cues. Tape them, clip them. Redundancy saves you when you're too tired to think. Her words weren't dramatic, they were survival. Hale felt something shift in the air. The same thing he'd felt years ago before a mission, when bravado burned off and only truth remained. Mara looked at the row of men, sweat-streaked, silent, watching her. "You think this is about toughness," she said softly. "It's not. It's about control. You don't win by being louder than the storm. You win by not panicking when it hits." Thunder cracked behind her, punctuating the words. For the first time, Navarro didn't have a comeback. His eyes flicked from her taped wrist to the coin chain peeking from her pocket. He recognized it now. Everyone did. Hale stepped forward. His voice was clear, steady. "Master Chief," he said, "I believe you owe Lieutenant Commander Ellison an apology." The grinder went silent. Every candidate froze. Navarro's mouth opened, then closed. His shoulders straightened. The weight of command left him no escape. He turned toward her, eyes heavy with something far older than embarrassment. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I was wrong." No excuses, no defense, just truth. Myra inclined her head once. "We've all been wrong before, Master Chief. That's how we learn." The storm finally broke overhead. Rain began to fall, fat drops hissing against the asphalt, streaking across their faces, their uniforms, their gear. Hale stood there watching, the sound of it washing everything clean. The woman they'd mocked now stood in full combat gear, calm in the downpour, as if she'd been born in it. Parker stepped forward, uncertain, voice trembling. "Ma'am, thank you for Alvarez." She adjusted the sling on her shoulder, water dripping from the brim of her helmet. "Boat crews don't lose boatmates," she said simply. The words settled deep. Thunder rolled again, closer now, echoing through the hangars and across the bay. In that moment, Hale knew she hadn't come here to be seen. She had come to remind them, and maybe herself, what quiet strength looked like when everything else fell apart. That night, as the storm raged, Hale sat alone in his office. The lights were dim, the rain tapping against the window. He turned his tablet on, opened her personnel file. Most of it was redacted, whole sections blacked out, but the header confirmed what he already knew. Ellison, Mara L., EOD Lieutenant Commander, Classified Service Record, Task Unit Alchem. He closed the file, staring at the rain. In the silence, he could almost hear her voice again, steady, restrained, calm. Fewer folded flags. And he realized then that some legacies aren't written in citations. They're carried quietly, in scars, in silence, in the patience to teach without needing to be thanked. Strength doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes dressed in gray PT shorts, carrying nothing but a coin, a scar, and a lesson the world had forgotten how to hear. How do you rebuild a sound? The grinder had once echoed with jeers, with the hollow clang of ego striking ego. But after the storm, the laughter was gone. What replaced it wasn't silence, it was awareness. The next morning dawned gray and clean. The air smelled of rain and gun oil. Puddles glistened like small mirrors scattered across the asphalt. In the distance, gulls cut across the bay, their wings flashing white against the low clouds. Candidates moved differently now. The swagger had thinned out. Their movements carried purpose, not performance. The grinder no longer sounded like punishment. It sounded like effort finding rhythm. Mara Ellison stood near the flagpole, boots damp, hair pulled back, watching without clipboard or rank. The sleeves of her shirt were rolled just enough to expose the edge of the kinesiology tape on her forearm, pale bands that had become their own quiet emblem. She didn't have to speak much anymore. The small things, a nod, a correction, a single word carried weight. Captain Hale leaned on the catwalk rail above, coffee in hand, watching her the way commanders watch an example they can't quite explain. He had seen Marines return from battle, seen medals pinned and heroes buried. But he had never seen someone dismantle arrogance without ever raising her voice. Navarro barked commands from the far end of the grinder, but the sharp edge was gone from his tone. It wasn't softness, it was control. The storm had washed something out of him too. "Boat Crew 4, he shouted. "Log up, move like one body." They lifted in unison. Even Parker, once the loudest voice in mockery, now counted cadence with precision. 1, 2, no grin, no bravado, just focus. Mara's gaze followed the line. Every movement, every strain, every misstep catalogued. Habit. The EOD mind never turned off. She didn't see people, she saw systems under pressure, physics, fatigue, timing. Hale climbed down from the catwalk, approaching slowly. "They're not just listening," he said as he came beside her. "They're adapting." She nodded slightly. Adaptation is the only apology that matters. The words settled between them. For a while they just watched. The sky began to clear, patches of pale sunlight breaking through the clouds. The grinder gleamed wet and dark. "You could have told them everything from the start," Hale said after a moment. "About Alkim, about who you are." "They weren't ready to hear it," she replied. "Respect means nothing if it's built on awe. It has to grow out of understanding." She reached into her pocket, turned the coin once. "This," she said softly, "wasn't meant to remind me of glory. It's to remind me of weight, the kind you can't put down." He studied her face, trying to read what she wasn't saying. "Does it ever stop?" "What?" "The weight." Mara exhaled, the faintest tremor in it. "No, you just get stronger at carrying it." By midday, the temperature rose again. Steam rose off the wet asphalt. The day's schedule called for night evolutions, low-visibility navigation and confined space drills in the pool hangar. The kind of training that tested not muscle, but nerve. Most of the candidates dreaded it. Darkness has a way of stripping pretense. As the sun fell, the base transformed. Floodlights snapped on. Shadows deepened. The sound of generators hummed through the still air. Mara lingered near the equipment cage, checking straps and safety clips while the instructors briefed. Her hands moved automatically, almost ritualistically. She didn't even realize she was counting clips, valves, couplings. Counting was control. Captain Hale joined her again, clipboard tucked under his arm. "You're staying for the night run." "Observation doesn't stop at sundown," she said. He nodded. "Neither do ghosts." She glanced at him. He meant it half as a joke, but her eyes didn't lighten. The hangar lights flickered once as thunder rolled far out to sea. Not another storm yet, just memory rumbling at the edges. When the candidates entered the pool bay, the air changed. Chlorine, sweat, metal. The surface of the water reflected the light like moving glass. The evolution was simple. Underwater knot tying, blackout mask drills, controlled breath. On paper, simple. In practice, every man there would fight the quiet panic that blooms when air runs short. Mara stood at the edge, arms folded, eyes steady on the pool. The fluorescent lights above cast pale bands across her face. As the first pair submerged, she watched their bubbles rise in clean rhythm, then slow. The second diver's hands fumbled, not slipping. Instructor's whistle blew sharp. Navarro stalked past her, muttering, "They lose their heads the moment they can't see." "Everyone does," Mara said. He stopped. "Even you." She didn't answer right away. Her gaze stayed fixed on the water. "Once." He waited, but that was all she offered. Hale, standing nearby, caught the look in her eyes, the 1,000-yard kind. The kind that isn't seeing what's in front of you. The air tasted of chlorine, but for her it turned to dust. The echo of breath against masked glass became something else, another sound, a long time ago. It was Alkim again. The memory didn't arrive softly, it landed like concussion. Night desert, a road under half-moon, the vehicle crippled, its wheels half buried in dirt, the radio screaming static and gunfire. And under it all that faint metallic tick, a timer waiting for breath. She remembered crawling forward, helmet scraping against metal, the weight of the ceramic blade in her hand, the hum of adrenaline that blotted out fear. The pressure plate was rigged twice, one main, one backup, wires buried deep. She could smell the explosive, RDX mixed with oil and sand. Someone above her, a voice shouting, "You don't have time." And then nothing but her own voice, whispering back, "Then I won't waste any." Her hands had moved like machines. Cut, twist, hold. Time didn't exist, only decision. The final cut had come with that faint click, the sound of a weapon disarmed. The convoy survived. She had not walked away unscarred. Back in the present, Mara's breathing slowed. She realized she'd been gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Navarro said something, she didn't hear it. Hale touched her arm lightly. "You all right?" She blinked, returned to the hangar. "Fine," she said, just remembering what panic sounds like. Hours passed. The evolutions continued. The candidates cycled through drills until exhaustion dulled their edges. Parker, now leader of Boat Crew 4, volunteered to stay behind for an extra set. Alvarez joined him. "Better to fail here than out there," Parker said, half breathless. Mara stood at the edge, watching. The floodlights hummed. The base had gone quiet outside, only the sound of water breaking and the occasional barked instruction echoing through the steel rafters. As Parker resurfaced after a dive, he leaned on the pool's edge, gasping. "Ma'am," he said between breaths, you ever get used to that feeling, when you can't see, can't breathe?" She crouched down beside him. "No," she said softly, "you just learn to hear other things instead." "Like what?" "The sound of your own heartbeat. If you can still hear that, you're not done yet." He nodded slowly, water dripping from his chin. "Guess that's something." She offered him a faint smile. "It's everything." Later that night, after the hangar emptied, Mara stayed behind. The pool was still, its surface reflecting the red emergency lights like blood in water. She sat on the bleachers, elbows on knees, the coin rolling between her fingers. The silence was heavy, but it didn't feel hostile, just vast. Footsteps approached, Hale again. "Thought you'd gone," she said without looking up. "I don't sleep well on nights like this," he replied. "Too much quiet." "Quiet's a gift," she said. He sat beside her, letting the silence stretch. Finally he said, "When you cut that wire, the one in Alchem, what made you stay under the truck?" She turned the coin once more before answering. "Because someone had to, and I didn't want it to be someone who wasn't ready." He nodded slowly. "That's not duty, that's sacrifice." "Same thing if you do it right." They sat in silence again, the hum of the lights filling the space between breaths. Then Hale spoke quietly. "You know, when you walked onto that grinder in those gray shorts, I thought you were lost." She chuckled softly. "I was." He looked at her. "Not anymore." Mara didn't answer. She just looked at the pool, at the way the surface never stopped moving, even when everything else looked still. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant, low, fatting. The next morning would bring new tests, new eyes watching. The whispers had already started across the base, about the woman who had stood her ground without raising her voice, who had turned ridicule into respect. But Mara Ellison didn't hear them. She didn't need to. She carried the memory of that night like she carried the coin, quietly, without display. Because the real victories aren't the ones anyone writes down. They're the ones that live unspoken in the silence after the storm. How do you test someone who's already passed every test that mattered? You give them a situation where everything goes wrong, and watch what happens when no one's watching. The week after the storm, Coronado shifted gears. The schedule flipped from grinder drills to field simulation, the final joint evolution before candidates rotated out. 2 days of controlled chaos, navigation under fire, casualty extraction, and comms coordination under time pressure. Officially, it was just a test. Unofficially, it was the closest thing to combat they'd ever face without live rounds. Captain Hale stood in the control room overlooking the training range, an expanse of scrub terrain dotted with mock structures and smoke canisters. The bay shimmered faintly in the distance beyond the wire. Beside him, Mara adjusted the headset around her neck, eyes scanning the feed monitors. She'd been asked to observe logistics and safety protocols, but everyone knew that after the last week, her presence carried more weight than that. Hale glanced at her profile, calm, expressionless. "You ready for this?" She didn't look at him. "Always." "Observation only," he reminded. "I'll stay out of their way," she said softly, then added, "if I can." He caught the edge in her tone, the part that belonged to the field, not the office. The candidates assembled outside the briefing tent. Their uniforms crisp, their movements tighter, more deliberate than before. Even Parker stood still, helmet tucked under his arm, face stripped of smirk or defiance. Navarro walked the line, his usual bark replaced by clipped precision. Today's not about muscle, it's about composure. Chaos will come. What you do with it decides if someone lives or dies. His gaze slid toward Mara briefly. You'll have an evaluator shadowing. Treat her as part of the field. You protect her like you would a teammate. No one flinched at that anymore. Mara met Parker's eyes as she adjusted her gear. There was no challenge in her look, just calm readiness. Parker gave a short nod, a soldier's acknowledgement. Hale's voice cut across the comms. Exercise begins at 0800. Scenarios are variable. Expect noise, smoke, and confusion. Stay disciplined. The timer hit 0. Sirens wailed. They moved as units, 4 crews splitting across the mock village, dust kicking under boots, radios crackling. Smoke grenades hissed from the ridge, filling the air with a chemical haze. Mara followed Crew 4, headset on, documenting, but her steps matched their rhythm. Old instincts never really die, they just wait. Navarro's voice came through the net. Contact North Alley, move to cover. Parker motioned his crew forward. The candidates moved low, rifles raised, forming angles of fire. Training ammo clattered against steel targets. The sounds, shouts, smoke, gunfire simulations blurred into the chaos she knew too well. Mara's heart rate climbed, but her breathing stayed slow. The mind of a bomb tech always looks for patterns, the one thing out of place. That's when she saw it. A wire, too bright, too new. Half buried near a mock fuel drum, part of the training scenario probably, but something about it caught her eye. She crouched. The layer of dust above it was undisturbed. Mara to control, she said calmly into her mic. Confirm this site cleared by range staff. Static, then Hale's voice. Affirmative, all training ordnance inert. Why? She stared at the wire again. It was routed differently, not looped for visual cueing like the safety trainers used. This one disappeared under a sandbag. Her pulse ticked once hard. Because this one isn't inert. Hale's voice sharpened. Say again. She was already moving, waving Parker's crew back. Back off, 10 meters now. Parker hesitated, confusion flashing across his face. Ma'am, it's a... Move, she barked, the tone pure instinct, command, not suggestion. They scattered. Navarro's voice cut in, urgent. Ellison, what the hell are you doing? Doing your safety audit, she said. Range has a live device. For 3 seconds, nobody breathed. Then she knelt. The world narrowed to the patch of earth in front of her. It wasn't a standard training prop. The shape under the bag was wrong, irregular. She brushed a layer of sand away with her glove. The casing was metal, not rubber. Improvised. Old but real. How the hell had it ended up here? Mara, Hale's voice came tight. You step back now, EOD en route. She didn't answer. Her hands were already tracing the outline, eyes mapping connections. Pressure trigger, likely unstable. She murmured to herself, barely audible. Field-made, maybe local surplus. Rust at the pin, but the line's intact. Navarro appeared at her shoulder. Ellison. She looked up, eyes sharp. You stay behind that truck, or I'll have Hale write your eulogy himself. For once, he obeyed. Hale's voice in her ear again, lower now. Ellison, stand down, you've done enough. She took a breath. Captain, I'm not diffusing this. Just stabilizing it so your EOD team doesn't walk into a dead man's switch. Do it fast. Doing it careful. Time slowed. Her hands moved the way they always had, precise, unhurried. She cut the power line first, isolating the circuit. Dust coated her fingers. The world narrowed to motion, breath, pulse. Parker crouched 10 meters back, eyes wide, whispering to Alvarez. She's not supposed to be doing that. Alvarez didn't reply. He couldn't look away. Mara found the pressure plate buried an inch beneath. She held it steady with her left hand, slipped a shim under it. Old trick, old memory. For a second her vision blurred, the flash of alchem again, the taste of sand and blood. A hum in her ear that wasn't comms, it was memory. She swallowed it down, pressed forward. "Plate stabilized," she said finally. "Device is safe to transport." The radio crackled. "Copy, team en route to recover." She leaned back slowly, exhaling. Only then did she realize her hands were shaking. Navarro stepped closer, voice low. "You just saved half my class." She didn't look at him. That wasn't the point. What was? Reminding you why silence exists, so when you hear something off, you trust it. He nodded, silent. Hale's voice came through again. "Ellison status." She keyed her mic. "Device contained. Recommend full range sweep. This wasn't an accident." "What do you mean?" "The trigger design, it's from a training batch we decommissioned years ago. Someone didn't get the memo." The implication hung heavy. Negligence or worse. Hours later, the range was cordoned off. EOD specialists combed the site, confirming her call live explosive, somehow mixed into the inert stockpile. The base moved like a body shaken but alive. Word spread fast, faster than the official channels could manage. By sundown, every candidate on base knew. She hadn't just observed safety, she'd prevented a tragedy. But Mara didn't celebrate. She spent the next hour sitting on a crate behind the hangar, helmet on her lap, staring at her taped forearm. The tape was peeling at the edges, dirt working into the seams. Hale found her there. "Range reports clean," he said quietly. "No casualties, you did good." "I did my job," she replied. He sat beside her. "Still counts." She shook her head. "Counting gets people careless. They start believing the ledger evens out." He studied her a moment. "You can't carry everything forever, Ellison." She looked at him, eyes tired but steady. "That's the thing about ordnance, Captain. Even when it's diffused, it's never gone. It just sits there, waiting for someone to forget it was once live." He didn't argue, he couldn't. That night the candidates gathered on the grinder, unplanned, unofficial. The kind of gathering that happens when men realize they've been spared something they didn't even see coming. Navarro stood at the front, rain jacket half-zipped, voice rough. "Before we close this phase," he said, "there's something that needs to be said." He gestured toward Mara, who stood at the back, arms folded, uncomfortable with attention. "She doesn't talk much, doesn't have to, but today she reminded us that quiet doesn't mean safe. Sometimes it means someone watching out for you in ways you'll never notice." He paused. "That's leadership." The candidates said nothing. Then Parker stepped forward, removing the strip of green tape from his canteen, the one he'd copied from her, and pressed it onto the grinder post. Others followed, one by one, small strips of green glinting under the floodlights like a wordless salute. Hale watched from the shadows, arms crossed. The rain began again, soft this time. Mara stayed still, the sound of it on her shoulders familiar, almost kind. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. Because sometimes the truest command doesn't echo, it endures. When the lights dimmed and the base went quiet, she walked back alone toward her quarters. The wind carried salt and the faint hum of generators. Her boots left no sound on the wet pavement. She paused once near the flagpole, looked back at the grinder, at the glint of green tape strips still fluttering in the rain. A faint smile touched her face. Maybe, for the first time in years, she believed the weight she carried had finally shifted, not gone, but shared. What's heavier, the weight of doing the wrong thing, or the silence that follows doing the right one? The range incident had ended without casualties, but peace never lasts long in places built on hierarchy. By morning, the story had spread beyond Coronado. By noon, it had reached command. And by evening, there was a file with Mara Ellison's name on it sitting in an inbox marked Inquiry Operational Conduct. It wasn't gratitude that traveled fastest, it was suspicion. Captain Hale stood in his office, blinds half closed, reading the first line of the report. Unverified field interference by non-assigned personnel during live ordnance simulation. The words tasted like bureaucracy, cold, careful, convenient. He looked up as the door opened. Mara stepped in, calm as ever, her uniform still damp from the morning rain. "They're calling it interference," she said before he could speak. He nodded. They always do when someone acts before asking permission. She leaned against the wall, crossing her arms. "I was under the impression saving lives didn't require clearance." "In practice, it doesn't," he said. "In paperwork, it always does." He slid the file across the desk. "They want a statement, chain of events, just the facts." Her gaze stayed on the folder, unreadable. "Facts or truths?" "Both," he said quietly, "but write the facts first. Truth takes longer to prove." The hearing was scheduled the next day. A procedural review, they called it. Simple, efficient, impersonal. But everyone on base knew what it really was, a reminder that even the right actions can make the wrong people uncomfortable. The room was small, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the air too cold. 3 officers sat behind a long table, insignias gleaming, faces neutral. Mara stood at the front, hands clasped behind her back. No lawyer, no defense, just a quiet presence that filled the space without demanding it. The senior officer, a commander with sharp eyes and perfect posture, adjusted his glasses. "Lieutenant Commander Ellison, according to the report, you entered an active range during an exercise not assigned to your division." "Yes, sir." "You were not authorized to perform EOD operations in that capacity." "No, sir." "And yet you proceeded." "Yes, sir." He paused. "Why?" Mara met his gaze evenly. "Because the device was real." He glanced down at the papers in front of him. "EOD confirms the ordnance was live, yes. However, your presence there was not mandated." "It was necessary." "Necessary to whom?" There was a silence. She could have said, to the recruits, to their lives, to every name carved on a memorial wall because someone hesitated, but she didn't. "To the mission," she said instead. The commander leaned back. "You're not on mission anymore, Lieutenant Commander. You're here to observe." Her eyes didn't waver. "Observation doesn't mean paralysis, sir." A younger officer at the end of the table frowned. "You could have been injured, or worse." "I've been both," she said simply. The room went still. The senior officer cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "You understand, Ellison, that by protocol, your actions constitute a breach of assignment." "Yes, sir." "Then you accept responsibility." She hesitated, not out of guilt but calculation, then nodded. "I accept the risk, not the accusation." Hale, seated at the back of the room, couldn't help but smile slightly. It was the kind of answer only someone who'd seen too much could give. The commander sighed, closing the file. "You'll be temporarily relieved of observation duties pending review." "Understood." "Dismissed." Outside, the corridor stretched long and empty, echoing every footstep. Mara walked slow, measured, as though speed would make the weight heavier. Hale caught up with her halfway down. "You handled that better than most admirals I've seen grilled under lights." "I've been under worse lights," she said. "They'll clear you," he said, "eventually." "Eventually doesn't fix what they teach." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She turned to face him. "They saw someone step in, solve a problem, and get benched for it. That's the lesson they'll remember, not the save, but the punishment." Hale looked down the hall, jaw tightening. "Then we'll have to rewrite the lesson." Over the next few days, the base moved on, at least that's what the command report said. Training resumed. The grinder echoed again, But beneath the rhythm there was a fracture. The recruits felt it. Navarro felt it. Even the wind seemed quieter. Mara kept to herself, confined now to the observation office, a small glass-walled room overlooking the bay. She still came early, still watched every drill, but without her on the field the candidate's energy dimmed. From her window she saw Parker running the log PT set. His form was perfect, but his voice carried no fire. Leadership without purpose is just noise. She sipped coffee gone cold, staring through the glass, until a knock pulled her back. Navarro stood at the door, rein on his shoulders, an expression somewhere between apology and defiance. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Neither should half this base," he replied. He stepped inside. "You know what they're saying." "I try not to. That you pulled that stunt for attention, that you wanted to prove something." She looked back out the window. "If I wanted attention, I'd have died doing it." He exhaled, shaking his head. "You know, before you got here, I thought control meant yelling loud enough to drown fear. Turns out it just means keeping your voice when everyone else loses theirs." She gave a faint smile. "Took me a few years to learn that too." He hesitated, then said quietly, "The recruits are asking about you. Parker, especially, wants to know if you're coming back to the field." "I go where I'm ordered, even if the order's wrong." She met his eyes, especially then. Navarro left without another word, but she could tell he understood. That night the bay wind howled. The storm had returned, not violent, just constant. The kind of weather that makes you remember things you tried to forget. Mara couldn't sleep. She paced her small quarters, the sound of rain tapping against the window sinking with her heartbeat. Her mind went back again to Alchem, the convoy, the blast, the silence after. But this time it wasn't the explosion she remembered. It was what came after. The debriefing room, the looks from men who couldn't understand how she'd done it, or why she wasn't broken. They hadn't questioned her courage, they'd questioned her place. She sat down on the floor, back against the wall, knees pulled close. Her fingers found the coin again. The metal was cold, edges worn smooth. She whispered to it, not words, just breath, a ritual she never named. Then a knock, 3 short taps. She stood, hesitated, then opened the door. Parker stood outside, drenched. "Ma'am," he said, almost shouting over the rain, "you need to see something." She grabbed her jacket. "What is it?" "Grinder now." They ran through the downpour, water slapping against their boots, wind tearing at their jackets. When they reached the grinder, she stopped short. Every candidate stood there, 20 men, soaked to the bone, lined up in silence, each one wearing a strip of green tape on their arm. Navarro stood at the front, rain running down his face. He saluted. "This isn't protest," he said. "It's recognition. You taught them something they won't forget, and I won't either." She looked at them, faces raw, exhausted, young, and for the first time in years she felt something break open in her chest. Not pain, relief. Hale stepped out from the shadows, arms crossed, rain dripping from his cap. "You see, Ellison, some lessons rewrite themselves." She smiled faintly. "You risked a lot letting them do this." "So did you," he said. "Guess we're even." The next morning, command sent word. Charges dropped. The report reclassified as heroic intervention under unclear circumstances. Typical language for when truth made the wrong people look small. Hale handed her the memo. "They won't apologize," he said. "They don't have to. What will you do now?" She looked out at the bay, sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "What I came here for, finish what I started." He nodded, "And after that?" She smiled, a rare, quiet kind. "Maybe disappear again. Some things work better when people forget who did them." That evening, as the sun set over the Pacific, the base fell silent once more. The grinder shimmered gold under the last light. Mara stood there alone, coin in her hand, the air heavy with salt and memory. In the distance, she heard laughter, light, honest, alive, the kind of sound that didn't mock anymore. She closed her hand around the coin and whispered, "Lesson complete. Some people fight battles to be remembered. Others fight so no one else has to." And when the noise fades, and the paperwork settles, and the uniforms dry, what remains isn't the story. It's the standard. How do you tell the difference between healing and hiding? Weeks passed. The storms faded and Coronado's days stretched longer, calmer. The grinder gleamed under clear skies again. Training resumed, laughter returned, real this time. The kind that didn't need to mock to exist. Lieutenant Commander Mara Ellison was back on the observation roster. No ceremony, no announcement, just her name reappearing quietly on the duty sheet like it had never left. When she walked across the grinder that first morning, the candidates straightened instinctively. They didn't salute, not formally, but the silence they gave her was worth more than any regulation. Captain Hale watched from the catwalk, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He'd seen leaders earn fear, respect, and sometimes hatred, but what Mara had earned was rarer trust, the kind that doesn't need witnesses. Navarro met her halfway across the asphalt. "Welcome back," he said, voice low. She nodded once. "Let's just get to work." That day, the base ran smoother than it had in months. Boat crews 1 through 4 completed every evolution without a single safety infraction. The medical team barely lifted a radio. The whole place moved like a machine finally tuned. Hale knew it wasn't coincidence. One person's quiet standard had shifted the gravity of the whole command. Later in the debrief room, Mara stood beside a whiteboard filled with scribbled notes and tactical diagrams. "They're starting to think beyond instruction," she said. "They're anticipating. That's when training turns into discipline." Navarro grinned. "You realize they quote you more than me now." She didn't look up from the notes. "Then make sure they're quoting me right." He chuckled. "They're trying." She smiled faintly, the kind of expression that vanishes almost as quickly as it appears. But beneath the rhythm of progress, something unsettled stirred again. She could feel it, the shift in the air before bad news arrives. That night, as the sun fell over the bay, Hale sat in his office. The hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the distant sound of surf and engines. He was reading through personnel summaries when the secure line on his desk rang, a sound that didn't belong in peaceful places. He hesitated, then picked it up. "Hale." A voice on the other end clipped and official. "Captain Hale, this is Naval Command Liaison. We're sending a courier to your office in the next hour. Document classified. Eyes-only delivery." "What's this about?" "Recall notice. Operational priority, Omega-7. Hale froze. That designation hadn't surfaced in years. For who? Pause, then, Lieutenant Commander Mara L. Ellison. He felt it, that cold weight returning, the one that only shows up when peace is about to be broken. An hour later, the courier arrived, a young lieutenant, soaked with sea spray, holding a sealed envelope marked confidential by hand only. Hale signed, dismissed him, then stood staring at the envelope for a long moment. He knew what was inside before he opened it. When he finally did, the letterhead confirmed his fear. Task Unit Cerberus, Joint Recon Recall Notice. Underneath. Subject Operational Reintegration, Classified Engagement. Lieutenant Commander Ellison is requested for temporary reassignment to assist in post-incident analysis and field advisory capacity. Mission parameters undisclosed. Clearance, Tier 1. Report within 48 hours. He exhaled slowly. Damn it. Outside, the wind was rising again. The next morning, Mara arrived early, before sunrise, before the base woke. She always liked those hours best, when the world hadn't decided yet what it wanted to be. She found Hale already waiting at her desk, the envelope between them. He slid it toward her without a word. She read the header, and something in her face shifted, not shock, not fear, just recognition. "They found me," she said quietly. He nodded. "I didn't forward it yet. You have a choice." "Do I?" "You do with me." She sat down, staring at the paper like it was a relic she thought she'd buried. "Cerberus," she murmured. "I thought that program was dead." "It is officially." "And unofficially." He shrugged. "Ghosts don't die easy." She leaned back, exhaling. "They want me to go back." "Advisory role," he said. "At least that's what they wrote." "That's how it starts." He didn't argue. Silence stretched, heavy, thoughtful, inevitable. Finally, she said, "When you've spent years holding wires together so things don't explode, it's hard to walk away when you know they're still fraying somewhere else." He studied her. "You're not obligated, Mara. You've done enough." "Enough for who?" she asked. He had no answer. By noon, the entire base knew she'd been summoned. No details, just whispers. Reassignment, deployment, return. Navarro found her near the docks, staring out at the horizon. "You leaving us?" She didn't turn. "Might be. After all this." She gave a faint smile. "No one stays on the grinder forever." He folded his arms. "You know, I used to think strength was measured by who could shout the longest. You taught me it's the opposite. That scares me a little." She chuckled softly. "It should." Then his tone changed, quieter. "You sure about this?" "No," she said honestly, "but peace makes me restless, and maybe that's my flaw." He shook his head. "No, that's your compass." That evening the sun burned red across the bay. The grinder was empty. The air still smelled of salt and training dust. Parker approached her, hesitant. "Ma'am," he said, "they said you're shipping out." "Just temporary." He nodded, unsure whether to believe it. "You ever get tired of saving people who don't even know they needed saving?" She smiled, tired, knowing. "Every day." "Then why do you keep doing it?" She looked toward the horizon. "Because someone once did it for me." He swallowed hard. "Can I ask something? What if the new crew screws up without you here?" She put a hand on his shoulder. "Then fix it before it breaks. That's what you've been training for." He nodded, eyes damp from more than wind. "Yes, ma'am." She started walking, then paused. "Parker." "Ma'am." Don't ever confuse quiet with weakness. It's usually the other way around. He didn't forget that. None of them would. The next morning her duffel sat packed by the barracks door. Only essentials: uniform, gloves, the taped coin. She ran her thumb over its scarred surface, feeling every groove like a map of her choices. Hale walked her to the transport pad. The helicopter idled on the tarmac, rotor wash kicking grit into the sunrise. "You could say no," he reminded her one last time. "I could," she said, "but then someone else who isn't ready would have to say yes." He nodded, resigned. "You've got that habit." "It's not a habit," she said. "It's the cost of peace." He smiled faintly. "You'll come back." She looked at the horizon, the endless blue where ocean met sky. "If there's something worth coming back to." He held out his hand. She took it. Firm, steady, no ceremony. "Godspeed, Commander," he said. She gave a half smile. "God doesn't speed, he waits." Then she climbed aboard. The rotors roared to life. Dust swirled. As the helicopter lifted off, the candidates on the grinder below looked up, a quiet salute. No words, no waving, just stillness. Mara looked down through the open side hatch. The strips of green tape were still there, fluttering faintly in the wind like silent flags. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the coin, and closed her fist around it. The horizon swallowed the base behind her. Ahead, only cloud and distance. Peace never lasts long for those who carry its cost. And sometimes, the only way to honor what you built is to walk away before it forgets why it stood in the first place. What do you owe the world after it's already taken everything you had? The helicopter cut low across the ocean, blades carving through dawn light. The world below blurred into gray-blue motion. Mara sat in silence, eyes fixed on the horizon, the coin in her palm steady as heartbeat. Opposite her, two operators from Task Unit Cerberus checked their gear. No words, just the sound of webbing straps and buckles. Professionals, the kind who didn't need introductions. The crew chief leaned in. 20 minutes to landing, ma'am. She nodded, tucking the coin into her sleeve pocket. Copy. The voice in her headset crackled. Welcome back to the field, Commander Ellison. She recognized it immediately. Colonel Ray Dane, the man who'd once called her the best mind we ever broke. Didn't think you'd still be running ghosts, she replied. Ghosts don't retire, he said. They just get reassigned. The insertion zone lay in a desert valley east of the Mediterranean. Half-ruined industrial sprawl, old supply lines, heat shimmering off broken metal. Officially, the mission didn't exist. Unofficially, something dangerous had surfaced, fragments of a forgotten munitions stockpile. The report said locals had scavenged the area, sold off components. But intelligence suggested something else. One of the devices bore her old schematic signature, a design she'd built years ago for testing detonation resistance. Her work, her ghost. The helicopter touched down in a swirl of dust. Mara stepped out, boots sinking into the powdery earth, wind hot and dry against her face. The air smelled of rust and old oil. A field officer approached, clipboard in hand. Commander Ellison. She nodded. Appreciate you coming. EOD team's been trying to map the spread. You'll see why we called you. He led her toward a concrete outpost ringed with wire. Inside, the air was cooler, stale with recycled conditioning. On the table lay a series of photos, blurred, grainy but unmistakable. Cylindrical casings, wires, and a familiar cut across the main charge housing diagonal deliberate, her old method. She felt the breath catch in her throat. These are mine. Your designs, yeah, the officer said carefully. Salvaged from a storage depot that went dark during drawdown. Someone been repurposing them. How many? Hard to tell. We've confirmed 3, maybe more. She closed her eyes for a moment, hearing again the metallic click of alchem, the hum of old fear returning. This wasn't coincidence, it was consequence. Hours later she walked the perimeter, sand shifting under her boots. The sun bled orange into the horizon. Each ruin looked the same, corroded metal, silence, the wind whispering through empty frames. But the details told her what mattered. The way the soil sank slightly near the northwest corner. The way debris was arranged too cleanly, staged. Someone had been here recently, someone careful. She crouched, brushing away sand, revealing faint wiring. Thin, sharp, almost invisible against the dirt. She followed it slowly, tracing the line with gloved fingers. It led to a buried casing no bigger than a shoebox. Improvised but sophisticated. Someone who knew enough to be dangerous. She exhaled, found one. Her radio crackled. Copy, Commander, proceeding with remote assessment. Negative, she said. Manual verification first. Ma'am, that's not protocol. She smiled faintly. Neither was surviving alchem. As she dug, the memory looped again, sand, heat, breath, the ticking that wasn't really sound but time itself. But this time she wasn't afraid. She was angry. Angry that after everything, the years, the pain, the lessons, someone still hadn't learned. She exposed the device fully. Hybrid design, built from her prototype shell but rewired crudely. Whoever built it didn't understand restraint. They'd overloaded the circuit. One wrong vibration could set it off. Remote's too risky, she murmured. We'll have to cut it. Her team lead's voice over comms. You want backup. No, if this blows, backup's just more names on a wall. She laid the tools out carefully. The desert went completely still. Not even the wind moved. Her breathing slowed. The world shrank to the wire beneath her hands. Cut 1, pause. Breathe. Cut 2, hold. Steady. She closed the final clamp, isolating the trigger circuit. The indicator light blinked once, then died. Silence. Then the faint exhale of the desert, as if the world had been holding its breath with her. Device safe, she said into the mic. A long pause. Then the voice came back, awe in its tone. Confirmed, you just saved half the valley, ma'am. Mara sat back slowly, staring at the dirt-streaked casing. Her reflection stared back faintly from its dull metal surface, older, scarred, unshaken. That night the desert wind turned cold. She sat alone outside the tent, the sky wide and merciless above, stars like scattered shrapnel. Dane approached quietly, a canteen in hand. "You still have that coin?" he asked. She turned it over in her palm. "Always. Never thought I'd see you back out here." "Neither did I," she said. He studied her for a moment. "You know, there's talk up the chain. They want to re-establish a full-time advisory post. You could head it." She looked up at him. "Why?" "Because people listen to you. Because your kind of precision saves lives." She smiled faintly. "You mean because I still do the things they won't write down?" He chuckled softly. "That too." She looked back at the horizon, the faint line of dawn beginning to rise. "I didn't come here to start over, Colonel. I came to finish what I left undone." "What's that?" She turned the coin in her fingers, the worn edges glinting under the stars. "Closure." 2 days later, the operation ended. The last of the devices was neutralized, catalogued, sealed. Command called it a success. But to her, it felt more like forgiveness, not from others, from herself. As the transport lifted off, the desert shrank beneath her, fading into distance and heat haze. Hale's voice crackled faintly in her ear through the encrypted line. "You alive out there?" "Alive enough. They'll want to debrief when you land." "Tell them I'm retired again," she said. He laughed softly. "You've retired more times than most people enlist." "Yeah," she said, watching the sun climb. "But this time I mean it." When she returned to Coronado, the base was mid-morning calm, recruits on the grinder, boats on the dock, gulls screaming overhead. Everything exactly as she'd left it. Except quieter, more centered. Navarro spotted her first. "Well, look who the tide dragged back." She dropped her duffel, stretching. "You holding up the fort?" "Barely," he said. "Crew 4 still talks about you like you're a ghost story." "Good," she said with a smirk. "Ghosts keep people careful." He chuckled. "Hale in his office. He didn't think you'd actually come back." She started walking. "Neither did I." Hale looked up from his desk when she entered. He didn't speak right away, just smiled in that quiet, knowing way of his. "You made it. Told you I would." He leaned back in his chair. "Command sent commendation drafts. They want to nominate you for field heroics." "Decline it." "I figured you'd say that." She shrugged. "You start pinning medals on silence, people forget what it means." He nodded slowly. "So what now?" She looked out the window, the grinder below, the crews moving in rhythm. Parker shouting cadence, steady, proud. "I think I'll teach," she said softly. "Not in classrooms, out there where it matters." Hale smiled. "Thought you already were." She didn't answer, just watched the recruits push through another round under the California sun. The wind off the bay carried the faint scent of salt and sweat and effort. Familiar, peaceful. That night she walked alone along the shoreline. The sky burned orange and violet, the waves catching the last light. She stopped near the pier, shoes in her hand, water lapping at her feet. The coin glinted between her fingers. For years it had been weight, guilt, memory, penance. But tonight it felt lighter. She crouched, held it over the water, then hesitated. "Not yet," she whispered. "Not until it's earned." She slipped it back into her pocket and stood, watching the horizon fade to dusk. The base lights blinked behind her, soft and distant. The world had turned quietly, without explosion, without applause. Just movement, steady, certain, alive. Somewhere behind her, the grinder whistle blew for the last drill of the day. The sound carried over the water like a heartbeat. She smiled. "Lesson complete," she said softly. "Again." Then she walked on into the fading light, her silhouette blending with the waves. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And sometimes the quietest soldier leaves behind the loudest change.